Welcome everybody to the first installment of Wine and a Song. And basically it's a new idea that we've been mulling around here at the Virginia Wine Notebook to kind of spread our wings a little bit and do something besides write about Virginia wineries and Virginia wine, which is of course not a bad thing at all, but there have been so many other blogs that have come up since we launched our blog. We launched our blog in 2010, and since then there have been quite a few new blogs out there, and some blogs a lot more active than our blog, so we decided to do something a little different and talk about two of our passions, not just one of our passions. One of our passions, of course, wine, and the other passion, of course, is music. And anybody who knows us a little bit about our background, we actually were DJs at one time. About 10 years ago, actually, we had a DJ company called Sound Lynx. Lynx spelled like the cat, L-Y-N-X. And we dissolved that because of a lot of reasons, but I won't get into that now. But we still are very passionate about music. So what we'd like to do with this new installment of videos is talk about what we call grossly underrated albums and a bottle of wine from Virginia Winery that goes really well with that particular album. And these are albums by very well-known artists, and these artists are from the classic rock era, which I define as 1963 to 1997. That's just my generalization. Rock and roll, of course, is still being made. There's a lot of indie rock out there that's great. There's a lot of popular rock that's great. There's a lot of popular rock that's not that great. There's a lot of popular music that's great. But for this particular wine blog, since it's our wine blog, we decided to concentrate on that time frame, 1963 to 1997. And we're going to pair it with a bottle of wine, mostly from Virginia wineries, but every now and then we'll have another bottle from a different place just to keep the variety going. We're still going to write installments on our blog when we feel the need to write something. We're just running out of ideas, frankly. We try to have a blog entry every month, and we're coming up a little dry. Our day jobs and our budgets do not allow us to travel all over the state and go to every single winery. There are still a lot of wineries in Virginia that we have not had a chance to get to, mainly the wineries around Danville and right on the North Carolina-Virginia border down there by whatever that lake is called. I think it's called Bugs Island Lake. I think it's got a couple of different names. It's a reservoir, it's not a lake, but if you've been in that area of North Carolina and Virginia where they meet, you know what I'm talking about. There are a lot of wineries around there. We'd like to go there one day. Maybe one day we will, but for now, we don't have the time. So I'm doing this instead, and these are going to be short clips because I know everybody wants stuff on the go. They don't want to sit in there and watch a 2-hour or even a 20-minute dissertation about music and wine. So I'll be quick. So I'll talk about what I call the grossly underrated or grossly overlooked albums by very popular artists and groups. And there are quite a few out there. If you know anything about popular music, you probably have a few of your own. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Led Zeppelin, all of them have albums that were not as successful as the others, either financially or critically or both in some cases. But I'm going to talk about some other artists. We'll get to the Beatles and Led Zeppelin maybe in some further installments. But for our debut episode, I'd like to talk about Paul Simon. Paul Simon has been making music now since, of course, the early 60s. And you know, of course, Simon and Garfunkel needs no introduction. But he had a solo career that got started in the early 70s, and he had a string of really great albums between 1971 or 1970, I think, or whenever the first album came out. I think it was 71, all the way until 75, I guess. That's 3 albums. But anyway, I'm going to be talking about an album here called Hearts and Bones. I'm not sure if you can see that CD. It's a CD. It's a remaster. This album came out in 1983, and it is a really interesting album. If you are familiar with Paul Simon's work as a solo artist and also with Simon and Garfunkel, or you probably are not familiar with this album. It didn't make it down to the charts. There were no singles. There's one single that was released from the album that I think made it to number 89 or something on the top 100. So 1983 was not a time where people were thinking about Paul Simon. The British invasion, or I should say the New Wave invasion, the MTV invasion was in full force that year. MTV was defining a lot of careers, and there were a lot of bands from England and Australia that were extremely popular, and a lot of the American artists, including Bruce Springsteen, for that matter, were kind of left in the dust until a few years later. So anyway, this came out in 1983, and it was originally meant as a Simon and Garfunkel record, which a lot of people who are familiar with Paul Simon already know. They got together, of course, for the reunion in Central Park that happened in 1981, and I guess they were able to patch up a lot of differences, so they had planned to make this album together, Hearts and Bones, but for some reason Garfunkel did not really get involved. I think he was trying to launch his own solo career, and there were some issues with the labels. I think Garfunkel was with a different label, so there were all these things that were happening. I don't think it had anything to do with them not wanting to work together. I think there were just other things, other forces that came into play. The other interesting thing about this album is it was around the time that Paul Simon and Carrie Fisher were starting to break up. And of course, they were an item. They were together, I think, from 1979 until 1982 or 83, right around the time the album came out. So there were a couple of songs on this album that are rather bitter because they're about the breakup of his relationship with Carrie Fisher, the late great Carrie Fisher, we just lost a few months ago. So the first single, the only single that was released from the album that got as high as, like I said, number 89, I think, was Allergies. Kind of an odd song, certainly unlike anything else that was on the radio that year, which is probably why it only got to number 89. But it's basically about the relationship and the breakup of his relationship with Carrie Fisher. And he talks about relationships when you have a disillusionment in a relationship. It's like having an allergy. It's an analogy that he likes to use. And Paul Simon is one of our greatest wordsmiths. I think his lyrics are really interesting. He uses words and phrases that you don't hear very often in popular music, like words like furthermore. You know, furthermore, my meaning may be misconstrued, which was a line from 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. And the Graceland had a lot of interesting terms on it, like astute. I mean, I can't think of any artist who's used the word astute in a song. Paul Simon has. So anyway, very good lyricist and interesting songs. And I'm gonna say just a few more words about this before I turn off the camera. I'm not playing any music from this album, mainly because of copyright issues. However, with YouTube and other Spotify and other stuff that's out there, you can probably download a couple of things from this album, if not the whole album. Hearts and Bones, 1983, once again. Another song on the album that is really interesting is the late great Johnny Ace, which is the last song on the album, which explores the phenomenon of Buddy Holly and John Lennon, and it kind of lumps them together. It's a very haunting song that talks about both of those artists and their demises, and the lyrics are extremely profound and deep, and it ends with Philip Glass, like this really strange, haunting instrumental by Philip Glass. So late great Johnny Ace, which was the pseudonym or nickname that John Lennon took when he set up his first band, which was a tribute to Buddy Holly. The Beatles started off as a Buddy Holly tribute band, which I'm sure Beatles fans already know that. So that's the first song is Allergies. The last song is a late great Johnny Ace. The songs in between are structured beautifully. In fact, they were a warm-up in many ways to Graceland. There's some songs on this album. This album came out 3 years before Graceland. But there's some songs on this album that you can definitely hear where he was going musically with the sounds, because he brought in the sounds of the Southern Hemisphere. You hear Brazilian musicianship in there, and not a lot of South African that much, mainly Brazilian and other parts of the world. There's some Indian motifs in there as well in some of the songs, and it's just really stellar stuff. I mean, the greatest hits album he put out in 1989 is called Negotiations and Love Songs. That was a compilation that he put out in 1989, and the title of that album, Negotiations and Love Songs, is actually a line from one of the songs from this album. This is an album that Paul Simon holds very dear to his heart. And there are actually more songs from this album on his greatest hits collection from 1989 than there are from Graceland. There are only 2 songs from the Graceland album on that compilation from 1989, and there are 3 songs from this album: Hearts and Bones, Train in the Distance, and Renee and Georgette Marguerite with Their Dog After the War. Very interesting song title: Renee and Georgette Marguerite with Their Dog After the War. I can't say enough about it. Please try it out. It's grossly underrated, grossly overlooked, which is why we're going to call this series Wholly Underrated Albums, Batman. Okay, I'm acting corny now. Let's talk about the wine. I can't forget about the wine, because we're also here to talk about the wine. I get carried away there with Paul Simon. What I think is a really good wine to pair with this particular album is this beauty here. It's a Tannat, believe it or not. Tannat is a style of wine you don't see very often in Virginia. Tannat is a wine that actually is grown very well in Uruguay, which goes really well with the songs from this album, because there are a lot of South American sounding songs from Hearts and Bones. Maggie Malick is actually the name of the proprietor, and I'm not sure if she's the winemaker. I'm going to feel really bad about this. I guess I didn't do my research properly. I think she is, but if anybody knows more about her, knows her personally, please correct me. But anyway, her winery is located in Loudoun County on Harpers Ferry Road, which is a road that goes kind of cuts a hypotenuse, really, if you will, between Route 9 and where Harpers Ferry is, and that's where Bro is located, and 868 Winery, and there are a couple other wineries along that stretch as well. Maggie Malick is located on that stretch of road, and her tasting room was actually under a hill and carved out into a cave. So her tastings are actually done in a cave, so to speak. Really interesting environment there. Beautiful patio. You go outside the cave and you enter this patio area. Sometimes there's a live band out there, maybe doing some Paul Simon songs. And there's a pond. It's a very serene location. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a bad location in Virginia for a winery, for like relaxing. But Maggie Malick is by far one of the most unusual. And Tannat, really good, very deep, almost a leathery complexion to the wine, very bold. I think that the alcohol level on this is, of course the sun is in my eyes right now and I can't see. Sorry, I have to take my glasses off for a second. It's not that bad, 13%. 13%. So, and I love the label. It's got kind of a silhouette. I think it's supposed to be her. Maggie Malick is also totally run by women, totally owned and operated by women, and I think it proceeds from the winery. Again, I'm quoting memory here, because I was at this winery about 2 years ago, but I believe there's a certain style of wine they do there, a certain type of wine, where some of the proceeds go to research breast cancer. So, doing a good deed. So definitely check out Maggie Malick's Wine Caves, and enjoy Hearts and Bones, 1983, Paul Simon. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.